The last laugh faded down the hallway as the door closed and the house finally fell silent. Emma stood still for a moment, her hand resting on the wooden doorframe, listening to the echo of footsteps as her relatives drove away. All day long, voices had filled the air. Greetings, chatter, the clinking of glasses, the occasional burst of laughter that had rolled through the rooms. Now, the quiet felt almost too heavy, like a blanket pressing down on her shoulders. Her son Michael had just turned 21. The celebration had been everything she thought he wanted. Family members she hadn't seen in years came to wish him well. Neighbors dropped by with cards, and cousins filled the living room with stories. Emma had baked for 2 days straight, decorated the house with balloons and lights, and smiled until her cheeks ached. She moved through the crowd, making sure everyone had what they needed, while inside her heart whispered for a moment of stillness. Now the guests were gone. The dishes stacked, the streamers drooping. The party was over, but for Emma, the weight of years didn't lift. She glanced at the kitchen counter, where half-eaten slices of cake leaned against paper plates and the scent of vanilla still lingered in the air. Balloons bobbed gently against the ceiling, catching the faint light of the lamps. While the clock ticked above her head with steady indifference, she exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carried more than tiredness. It carried memories of birthdays past when Michael was small and blew out candles with wide eyes, of years when she worked late shifts just to make sure there was something to celebrate, of moments she had pushed her own wishes aside so his could shine. She had always told herself it was worth it, and it was. Still, there was an emptiness inside her chest, quiet longing she never dared speak aloud. She rubbed her temples, feeling the dull ache from smiling too long. For everyone else, today had been joyous. For her, it had been bittersweet. Watching Michael step into adulthood reminded her of all the years she had carried alone. She loved him more than anything in the world. But in loving him so completely, she had almost forgotten who she used to be. Emma turned off the light in the dining room and walked into the living room. The sofa cushions were dented from hours of use, and cups stood like little soldiers on the coffee table. She gathered a few, balancing them in her hands, her body moving on autopilot. She had been doing this kind of cleaning for decades, clearing away not just cups and plates, but also the feeling she didn't want anyone to notice. When she looked up, she froze. Michael was still there. He was sitting on the far end of the couch, his back slightly slouched, his eyes fixed on her in a way that made her pause. She hadn't realized he'd stayed behind when the last group of cousins left. The glow of the floor lamp lit his face, and for a brief moment she was struck by how much he had changed. He wasn't the boy she used to tuck in at night. His features had sharpened, his jaw stronger, his eyes carrying a depth that hadn't been there before. He looked like a man now. But there was also something in his gaze, a softness that made her heart shift uneasily. Emma tried to smile. "You should get some rest, honey. It's been a long day." But Michael didn't move. He leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped together, his voice quiet but steady. "Mom," he said, "don't go to bed yet. I need to tell you something." The words hung in the air like a secret waiting to be unwrapped. Emma felt a flicker of nerves ripple through her chest. She set the cups back down and walked closer, lowering herself onto the armchair across from him. Her body was tired, but her mind was suddenly alert, curious. She studied his face, noticing how serious he looked. Michael had never been one to open up easily. He was thoughtful, yes, but private. He kept things to himself, carried his burdens quietly. For him to stop her like this, to ask for her attention in such a deliberate way, it meant something. Emma folded her hands in her lap and waited, the tick of the wall clock filling the silence between them. The night felt different now, charged with something she couldn't quite name. Her heart beat faster, for the first time in years. She wasn't just a mother cleaning up after a party. She was a woman sitting in a room that had suddenly grown smaller, waiting for her grown son to speak words that might change everything. The room felt heavier now, though nothing had changed except the silence between them. Emma leaned back in the chair, trying to steady her breath. Michael's eyes, calm but strangely intense, didn't leave hers. She could see something pressing at the edge of his lips, words he had held in for far too long. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, as though unsure where to begin. His hands rubbed together nervously, a habit he had since childhood when he had to admit something important. Emma's heart tightened. She wanted to ease the tension, to tell him everything was fine. But the weight in his eyes told her it wasn't small talk. Finally, he spoke. "Mom, I saw it all. Even when you thought I didn't." Emma frowned softly, confused. "Saw what?" Michael leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "The sacrifices. The long nights. The times you went without so I could have more. You always acted strong, like nothing could break you. But I noticed. I always noticed." His voice was low, but it carried a firmness that cut through her. Emma blinked, surprised, her throat tight. She wanted to laugh it off, to tell him he was exaggerating, but the sincerity in his tone stopped her. He wasn't exaggerating. He was remembering. Not Michael went on, his words rushing now, as if a dam had broken. "You worked jobs you hated just to keep food on the table. You smiled at me when I knew you were too tired to even stand. You put away your own dreams so I wouldn't feel the weight of them. You think I didn't see it, but I did. I saw everything." Emma's hands gripped the armrest. No one had ever spoken to her like this, not even him. She had buried her weariness deep, presenting only strength. But here he was, her son, telling her he had carried her hidden truth all along. "Michael," she whispered, her voice trembling. He shook his head, cutting her off gently. "No, let me say it. Tonight, I can't stay quiet anymore." His eyes softened, filling with something she hadn't seen before, a mix of gratitude, guilt, and something deeper. "You've lived for me, Mom. But when was the last time you lived for yourself?" Emma's chest tightened. The question hit her harder than she expected. When had she lived for herself? She searched her memory, but the images that surfaced were of him, Michael, as a baby in her arms. Michael at school with a nervous smile. Michael growing taller each year. Her life had been measured in his milestones, not her own. She tried to answer, but no words came. Michael leaned back slightly, his voice calmer now. "I used to think it was normal, that mothers just give everything. But the older I get, the more I realize how unfair it was to you. You gave up so much, and you never once asked for anything back." Emma felt tears sting her eyes. She had never wanted him to carry guilt. She had chosen her path, chosen to love him above all else. Yet hearing him speak like this, hearing him recognize the invisible weight she had carried, made something crack inside her. She whispered, "I didn't mind. You were worth it." "I know," Michael replied quickly, his eyes bright. "But that's not the point. The point is, you deserve more than just survival. You deserve to feel alive again." The words lingered in the room, heavy and beautiful at the same time. Emma pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat quicken. She had long ago accepted her role, her sacrifices, her loneliness. To imagine life as something more felt dangerous. It's almost like betrayal to the years she had lived quietly. Michael's voice softened. "I waited until tonight to say this because I didn't want to embarrass you in front of anyone. I wanted it to just be us. I've been holding this in for years." Emma shook her head slowly, trying to gather her thoughts. "Michael, But he didn't let her finish. His eyes locked on hers, and his tone carried both strength and tenderness. "Mom, I don't just love you because you're my mother. I admire you as a person. I see the woman you are, strong, beautiful, but also tired. You don't have to keep carrying it all alone. You don't have to keep hiding behind that smile." Her tears slipped free now, rolling down her cheeks. For decades, she had been the giver, the protector, the one who kept everything together. No one had ever stopped to look at her the way he was looking at her now, not as a caretaker, but as a woman who had long been unseen. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of her quiet sobs. She wiped her face quickly, embarrassed. But Michael's expression only softened more. "You don't have to be embarrassed," he said gently. "It's okay to admit you're tired. It's okay to admit you want something more. I need you to know that I see you, not just as my mom, as you, Emma's breath caught. Those last two words as you unraveled her completely. She had forgotten what it felt like to be seen beyond the title of mother. Somewhere along the way, Emma, the woman, had been buried under Emma the provider, the nurturer, the fighter. And now, her son was unearthing her with nothing but truth. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the words settle into her chest. When she opened them again, she found Michael watching her with a look that was both tender and determined. It frightened her, but it also warmed something deep inside her. Emma tried to find her voice, but all she managed was a whisper. "Michael, why now?" His lips curved into the faintest smile. "Because I'm old enough now to understand what you've done for me. And because I can't stand watching you hide yourself any longer. I want more for you. I want you to want more for yourself." The sincerity in his tone left no room for doubt. Emma sat in silence, her heart racing, her thoughts spinning. She knew that from this moment on, nothing between them would ever feel quite the same. And in the quiet of that night, with the balloons still drifting gently against the ceiling and the faint smell of birthday cake still lingering in the air, Emma realized her life was about to change, not because she wanted it, but because her son had finally spoken the words she had been too afraid to admit herself. The night pressed close around the house, the kind of quiet that made every sound louder, every silence deeper. Emma sat frozen in her chair, her son's words echoing in her chest. She had no idea what to say. She wanted to comfort him, to ease the heaviness in his voice. But she also couldn't ignore the way those words pierced into her like light breaking into a darkened room. Michael rose from the couch and moved toward the window. His tall frame seemed restless, his hand brushing against the glass as though he was searching for the right way to release the storm inside him. Emma watched him carefully, her heart unsettled. Something more was coming, something he had been holding back. Just as he said, his voice came low, almost trembling. "I've always wanted to say this, but I kept it inside. I waited. I thought maybe you weren't ready to hear it. Maybe I wasn't ready to say it." Emma's breath caught. Her hands gripped the chair's armrests as she tried to prepare herself. She thought maybe he was going to tell her about a mistake, a fear, or a dream of leaving. But the way he turned toward her, his eyes shining with something deeper, told her it wasn't that simple. Michael's chest rose and fell quickly. His words came like a confession. "I don't just want to be your son, Mom. I want to be the one who gives you a life worth smiling about." The air seemed to stop moving. Emma's lips parted, but no sound came out. She stared at him, her heart pounding so hard it almost hurt. She wasn't sure if she had heard him right. The sentence hung between them, impossible and undeniable at the same time. Her first instinct was to deny it, to shake her head, to tell him he was confused. But the look on his face wasn't confused. It was certain. It was the look of a man who had thought about this for a long time and had finally found the courage to speak. Emma swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Michael, you're my son," she whispered, almost to remind herself as much as him. "I know," he answered quickly, his voice steady, his eyes never leaving hers. "And nothing will ever change that. But I also know what I feel. I've felt it growing for years. You gave up everything for me. You gave me love that no one else could have given. And somewhere along the way, I realized I want to give that back to you. Not as a boy needing his mother, but as a man who sees the woman you are." Emma's pulse raced, her mind spinning. These were words she had never imagined hearing from him, words she didn't think were possible. She had dreamed, yes, dreamed of being seen again, of being loved again, of someone noticing the woman she still was beneath the role of mother. But those dreams were buried, unspoken, locked deep where no one could reach them. Now her son had unlocked them with a single truth. Her voice broke as she spoke. "Do you know what you're saying?" Michael nodded without hesitation. "I've thought about it more than you know. I've stayed quiet because I didn't want to scare you. But tonight, I couldn't keep it in anymore. I saw you sitting there, looking so tired, so alone, even in a room full of people. And I realized I can't let you keep living that way. Not when I could be the one to give you something more." Emma pressed her hand against her chest. Her heartbeat was frantic, her emotions torn between fear and longing. "Michael, this isn't how things are supposed to be," she whispered. His steps toward her were slow but firm. "Maybe not in the way the world sees it, but in my heart it feels right. You're not just my mother. You're the most important person in my life, the one who taught me what love really is. And I can't ignore the truth that what I feel now is different, stronger, deeper." Emma's eyes filled with tears again. She looked away, trying to gather herself, but his words wrapped around her like a net, refusing to let her escape. "I dreamed of this too," she admitted in a broken voice, surprising even herself. "Not like this, not exactly. But I dreamed of someone seeing me, truly seeing me. I thought that part of my life was gone forever. I buried it. I told myself it didn't matter anymore. But now, hearing you say these things..." She trailed off, unable to continue. Michael's face softened. He knelt down in front of her chair, so his eyes were level with hers. "Mom, I don't want you to be ashamed of your feelings. I don't want you to pretend anymore. You deserve to be happy, to be loved, to live fully. If the world doesn't understand, let it be. What matters is what we feel right here, right now." Her tears fell freely now. She reached out without thinking, brushing her fingers across his cheek, the way she had done countless times when he was a child. But this time, the touch felt different. He leaned into her hand, closing his eyes. And she felt the warmth of his skin beneath her trembling fingers. It terrified her how natural it felt. "Michael," she whispered, "this could change everything." He opened his eyes again, his gaze steady, unwavering. "That's the point. I want it too. I want to change your life the way you changed mine." Emma's body trembled. She had spent so many years hiding her desires, pushing them deep, convincing herself they didn't matter. But now, for the first time, someone was telling her it was okay to want more. That someone was her son, the very person she had sacrificed everything for. Her mind screamed at her to resist. Stop this before it went any further. But her heart whispered something else. Her heart whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the love she had been waiting for all along. The balloons drifted lazily against the ceiling, the scent of cake still clinging to the air, as mother and son stared at each other across a line that had already been crossed in silence. The night had shifted. Nothing would ever be the same. And Emma, for the first time in years, felt both terrified and alive. The house was dark, except for the golden glow of a single lamp in the living room. The shadows stretched across the floor, and Emma sat trembling in her chair, trying to steady her breathing. Her son's words still rang in her head, so powerful that she could barely think. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was mistaken, but the truth was harder to silence. His words had awakened something she had buried for years. Her hands trembled as she placed them on the table beside her. Every movement felt too heavy, every sound too loud in the silence of the room. She had spent decades hiding her emotions, holding her pain inside. And tonight, it was all breaking open. Michael walked back from the window, his steps slow, deliberate. When he sat beside her on the couch, the space between them seemed to vanish. His presence wasn't just comforting, it was commanding, grounding her in a way she didn't expect. "You don't have to be alone anymore," he said softly, his voice steady, his eyes never leaving hers. Emma swallowed hard. The words cut into her like a blade, sharp but gentle. They weren't just words, they were a promise, an invitation. She wanted to believe them, but fear kept her chained. "I've been alone for a long time," she whispered. Her voice cracked, fragile. "It's easier that way. It's safer." Michael shook his head. "Safer doesn't mean happier. You've carried the weight of everything for so long. You don't have to keep pretending it doesn't hurt." Her chest tightened. She turned her face away, ashamed of the tears threatening to fall. She hated feeling vulnerable, hated letting anyone see the cracks in her strength. But he had seen them anyway. He always had. "I don't know if I can let myself feel this," she admitted, her voice shaking. "What if it's wrong? What if it ruins everything we have?" Michael's hand hovered above hers, hesitating for only a moment before resting gently over her trembling fingers. His touch was warm, steady, and patient. It wasn't forceful, it was a quiet reassurance. Nothing we feel for each other could ever ruin what we have, he said firmly. Love doesn't destroy, heals. It builds. Emma closed her eyes, her tears spilling freely now. She had lived years without hearing words like these. Years without being reminded that she was more than a mother, more than a provider, more than someone holding a family together. She had forgotten what it felt like to be seen, to be cherished. Her heart ached as she whispered, Michael, the world would never understand. Then let the world stay outside, he answered. What matters is us, right here. Right now, the room felt charged with something indescribable, something larger than either of them. The quiet between them wasn't empty anymore. It was alive, pulsing with unspoken truth. Emma tried to pull her hand back, but his grip tightened just enough to stop her. Not controlling, not demanding, simply refusing to let her retreat into fear. His eyes locked on hers, filled with a certainty that both frightened and comforted her. She searched his face, desperate for answers. And what she saw was not the boy she had raised, but a man, steady, devoted, and unafraid to love her in ways she thought no one ever could. Her voice broke again. I'm scared. I know, Michael replied gently. But you've been scared your whole life and still kept moving forward. You've been brave for me, for everyone else now. Be brave for yourself. The words pierced her. She had been brave for years, but always for someone else. Never for herself. Never for her own heart. Emma leaned back against the couch, her body trembling, her breath shallow. For a long time she had convinced herself she was done with love, done with desire, done with hope. But sitting here with Michael's hand wrapped around hers, she realized those feelings had only been sleeping. And now, slowly, painfully, they were waking. The lamp flickered faintly. Shadows dancing on the walls as though the house itself knew something was changing. The air between them grew heavier, filled with the weight of everything unsaid. Emma turned toward him fully, her eyes wet, her lips trembling. If I let this happen, she whispered, everything will change. We can't go back. Michael didn't flinch. He held her gaze with a quiet strength that steadied her shaking heart. That's the point, he said softly. You deserve a new beginning. You deserve to feel alive again. And I want to be the one to give that to you. Her tears fell faster, but for the first time they weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of surrender. She had held back for so long, locked herself away in loneliness. And now someone, the person she least expected, was asking her to open the door. She whispered, almost to herself, Love doesn't always follow the rules, does it? Michael shook his head slowly, his thumb brushing gently across her hand. No, love just is. It finds you where you least expect it. It changes you before you even know it's happening. And when it's real, it's worth everything. Emma's breath hitched. She wanted to resist, but her heart betrayed her. Every beat told her this was real. Every shiver down her spine told her this was the truth she had been running from. And in that moment, she realized something terrifying but beautiful. Love had returned to her life. Not from a stranger, not from the world outside, but from the one person who had waited patiently for her to see it. The clock ticked on. The night deepened, and the world outside carried on unaware. But inside that quiet living room, something irreversible had begun. Emma leaned back into the couch cushions, her tears drying, her body trembling, but her spirit awake. She looked at Michael not as the child she had raised, but as the man who had seen her hidden heart and chosen not to look away. Her lips parted, and in a shaky whisper she admitted the words she had been too afraid to say. Maybe I want this too. And with that single confession, the night shifted forever. The house felt smaller now, as though the walls had pulled closer around them. The silence was no longer empty, but alive, carrying the weight of everything left unsaid. Emma's heart raced in her chest, each beat louder than the clock on the wall. She sat still, unable to look away from Michael. unable to calm the storm building inside her. Her hands trembled in her lap, her body fighting two truths at once. Part of her screamed that this wasn't right, that she should stop this before it went too far. But another part, the part that had been buried under years of sacrifice and loneliness, begged her to finally let go, to finally be seen, to finally be loved. Michael's voice broke through her thoughts, low but steady. I don't want you to think of me as just your son tonight. I want you to see me as someone who can love you the way you've always deserved. Emma's breath caught. His words felt like a key sliding into a lock she had kept hidden for decades. The door she had closed long ago, the door to her desires, her hopes, her right to happiness, trembled against its hinges. She shook her head weakly, her tears falling again. Michael, you don't know what you're saying. You're young. You don't understand how heavy this is. I do, he said firmly, leaning closer. I've thought about this for years. I've watched you carry so much pain, and it killed me to stay silent. But I'm not a child anymore. I know what I feel, and I know it's real. I don't want you to hide from it either. Emma pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to steady her breath. His words burned into her, not in anger, but in truth. She knew he wasn't speaking out of confusion. He spoke with the certainty of someone who had carried this in his heart for far too long. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Why me? You could have anyone. Someone younger, someone with less baggage, someone the world would approve of." Michael's jaw tightened, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because none of them are you. None of them matter to me the way you do. You're not just my mother. You're the woman who gave me everything, the woman who showed me what love really is. And the truth is, I don't want anyone else. I only want you." Emma's tears spilled freely now. No one had ever spoken to her like this, not with such conviction, not with such devotion. She thought of all the years she had spent convincing herself she didn't need to be loved again, that her chance at happiness had passed. But sitting here with Michael's hand over hers, she realized how wrong she had been. She hadn't stopped needing love. She had only stopped believing she would ever find it. Her voice trembled. "Michael, if I open my heart, if I let this happen, it could destroy everything we've built." His grip on her hand tightened gently, his touch grounding her. "Or it could heal everything we've lost. Mom, I don't want you to keep living half a life. I want you to feel whole again. And if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel alone." Emma's chest rose and fell in shaky breaths. For so long she had told herself she was strong enough to stand alone. She had built walls around her heart, convincing herself it was safer that way. But Michael had found the cracks in those walls. And now they were crumbling around her. Her tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "I've spent years giving. I don't know how to take. I don't know if I remember how to be loved." Michael leaned closer, his voice soft but unwavering. "Then let me teach you. Let me remind you what it feels like. You don't have to do this alone anymore." Emma's heart clenched painfully. His words touched something she hadn't dared to admit even to herself. She didn't want to be alone anymore. She was tired of carrying everything on her shoulders. She was tired of pretending she was fine. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope, fragile but alive. Her tears slowed, replaced by a trembling calm. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not just her son, but a man strong, determined, and full of a love that refused to be denied. She reached out with a shaking hand and touched his face. Her fingers brushed against his skin, and he closed his eyes, leaning into her touch as though it was the most natural thing in the world. Her breath caught at the intimacy of the moment, at the simple truth it revealed. "I don't know if I can be brave enough," she whispered. "You've been brave your whole life," Michael replied. "This time, be brave for yourself." Emma felt her walls finally give way. She had spent years hiding her heart, but tonight, under the quiet glow of the lamp and the steady warmth of her son's touch, she let herself imagine a life she thought was gone forever. A life where she wasn't just giving, but receiving. A life where she was loved, not out of obligation, but out of choice, and for the first time in years. She let the possibilities settle into her heart. Her voice was barely audible, but it carried more weight than anything she had ever said. Maybe I'm ready to try. Michael's eyes opened, filled with emotion, his hand tightening gently around hers. That's all I need to hear. The room seemed to exhale with her, as though the house itself had been holding its breath. The weight of years lifted, not completely, but enough to let her heart beat freely again. Emma sat there, trembling but alive, her heart unlocked at last. And she knew, no matter what the world thought, that tonight had changed everything. The night stretched long, yet neither of them wanted it to end. Emma sat with Michael in the living room, the lamp casting a warm glow over their faces. Her hands were still trembling, but now it wasn't just fear. It was the weight of choice pressing against her heart. She knew what they were standing on, a fragile edge between what had always been and what could be. Michael's eyes held hers without wavering, full of a love that no storm could wash away. "You don't have to decide everything tonight," he said softly. "All I ask is that you don't push me away. Let me stand beside you in whatever way you'll allow." Emma closed her eyes and exhaled shakily. She had never been good at letting others in. Years of raising Michael alone had taught her to be strong, to survive without leaning on anyone. But tonight had cracked that strength wide open. Showing her the tender truth she had buried, she longed for someone to lean on too. Her voice was unsteady. "If we step into this, our lives will never be the same." Michael reached for her hand again, his grip steady and warm. "That's what I want. I don't want the same. I want something real with you." Her throat tightened as she looked at him. He was so certain, so sure. It scared her, but it also pulled her closer. She had spent years telling herself she was undeserving of love, that she had made too many mistakes, that her chance was gone. Yet here was Michael, looking at her as though she was the only thing that mattered in the world. She whispered, "You don't see my flaws." He smiled faintly. "I see all of them, and I love you anyway." The words struck her like lightning, not because she didn't believe him, but because she had never allowed herself to believe anyone could mean them. A tear slipped down her cheek as she leaned back into the couch, her hand never leaving his. The minutes ticked by in silence, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was full, heavy with everything they both felt, but couldn't put into words. Emma stared at their hands, fingers entwined, and felt a quiet strength she hadn't felt in years. She realized Michael wasn't asking her to leap blindly. He was asking her to trust, one step at a time. At last she spoke, her voice trembling but firm. "I don't know where this road will take us. People will never understand. It might break us before it makes us." Michael's gaze softened, but his voice carried a fierce conviction. "Then let them talk. Let them misunderstand. None of that matters, because I know what's in my heart, and I know what's in yours too. We can face it together." Her breath hitched. She had always admired his courage, but tonight it was different. Tonight his courage was pulling her out of the shadows of her own fear. Slowly, Emma leaned her head against his shoulder. The movement was small, but it felt like the biggest step she had ever taken. Michael froze for a second, then let out a long, shaky breath, his hand gently covering hers. For the first time, she didn't resist the comfort. She let herself sink into it. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "I don't know if I can give you everything you want." "You already have," he said, resting his cheek against her hair. The words wrapped around her heart like a promise. For years she had lived with silence, loneliness, and an ache she couldn't name. But in this moment, leaning against Michael, she felt something new. Not just love, but peace. The kind that comes when you stop running from yourself. The clock struck midnight, but neither of them moved. They stayed there, caught in a fragile stillness that was both terrifying and beautiful. Emma's thoughts drifted to all the what-ifs, the doubts, the risks. But each time fear tried to speak louder, Michael's presence quieted it. Finally, she lifted her head and looked at him, her tears shimmering in the lamplight. "Promise me one thing," she said softly. "Anything," he answered. Promise me that if this breaks, you won't regret it. Promise me you won't hate me for being afraid." His eyes burned with emotion as he whispered, "I could never hate you. Loving you is the only thing I know for sure." Her chest tightened at his words, a mix of pain and wonder flooding her. She had been waiting her whole life for someone to love her like that, unconditionally, without fear, without apology, and now it was here in the most unexpected form. She reached up, cupping his face gently, her thumb brushing against his skin. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing briefly, as though the world outside had disappeared. In that fragile space, Emma made a choice, not for the world, not for anyone else, but for herself. "I'll try," she whispered. "I don't know what tomorrow will look like, but tonight I'll try." Michael's eyes opened, glistening with relief and joy. He didn't speak because words weren't enough. Instead, he held her hand against his cheek, grounding her in the silence that carried more truth than anything else could. The night went on, but time seemed to stand still. For the first time in years, Emma allowed herself to breathe freely. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't know where their story would go. But she knew one thing with certainty. Her son had waited until everyone else was gone, until the world was quiet, to give her the one gift she never expected, a love that could change her life. And in that moment, she let it.